Good morning. This is Ron, and it is Thursday, March the 15th. Welcome to Storytime. This morning, this is going to be a Storytime Extra, and it's going to be from an episode or edition of Popular Mechanics, April 2018. April 2018. And the article is called What Happened to Smartphones? We used to love smartphones. We used to wait in line for them and dress them up in pretty cases and show them off to our friends. Many of us still do, but things seem different. People are using words like invasive, codependent, junkies, addiction. Serious language meant to suggest our total submission. In the last 6 months, a backlash against smartphones has arisen from all corners of the country, from luminaries and musicians, and even former tech executives. Now, for the first time, several of them have spoken to Popular Mechanics about why, exactly, they chose this moment to use their considerable power to try to stop devices from turning our society into a Mad Max hellscape. Quote, last year was a pivotal year in our relationship with technology, unquote, says author Arianna Huffington, who, in January, released an app called Thrive, in partnership with Samsung, that temporarily halts phone notifications. For many, quote, for many, the unfolding story of how technology was used to undermine our elections served as a wake-up call. But there's a wider story that has been bubbling up in the zeitgeist for years, as technology accelerated the pace of our lives and has made it seem like we're living in service of our devices rather than leveraging tools to make our lives better, unquote. In January, Jana Partners, a private equity firm and one of Apple's largest shareholders, co-wrote a letter to Apple demanding that the company help parents mitigate the effects of smartphone use on children. Charles Penner, a partner at Jana Partners, told us, quote, companies can do things that both increase their own value and enhance value to society. An obvious example is the environment. You now have companies responding to the fact that climate change is no longer a theoretical risk. We thought the same thing was likely to happen with technology. Popular perceptions of technology are changing for the worse. Risks that people used to think are theoretical are starting to show up in real ways, unquote. And then there's the rock and roll rationale. Quote, we think you'll enjoy looking up from your gadgets for a little while and experience music and our shared love of it in person, unquote. Jack White said in his announcement, also in January, that fans would be expected to lock away their phones in yonder cases at his future concerts. If smartphone backlash were the juicing movement, we'd have reached peak coconut kale acai bowl with goji berries. More than 600 schools across the country are using those yonder cases, neoprene pouches that temporarily lock phones away using a mechanism somewhat like those old shoplifting deterrent tags. Last year, Nokia released the dumb phone it first put out in the year 2000. It sold out in a week. And in December 2017, Facebook pledged $1 million towards studying the relationship between media technologies and well-being. Why the relatively sudden demonization of everybody's favorite appendage? In looking for an answer, my first stop, as usual, was science. I called a bunch of researchers and asked if there was any hard evidence that might have suddenly swayed public opinion. Quote, I can't think of a single study that compellingly demonstrates that this has somehow changed our brain, unquote, says Jason Chine, an associate professor of psychology at Temple University, who recently wrote a paper that reviewed 100 scientific studies on the topic. Lindsay Squeglia, a psychiatry professor at the Medical University of South Carolina, runs the Mobile Technology Work Group for the Adolescent Brain Cognitive Development ABCD study, which promises to be the largest longitudinal study of brain development and child health ever undertaken in the United States. Supported by $300 million from the National Institutes of Health, researchers have been enrolling 10,000 9 to 10-year-olds since the late 2016 and will follow them for a decade to determine how social media and smartphone use, along with a host of other factors, affects academic achievement, emotional functioning, and brain development. Quote, it's flashy to say that this is ruining our kids' trajectories, and it always gets you on the front page of the paper or on the Today Show, unquote, Squeglia says. Quote, I take a much more unbiased approach. It always ends up somewhere in the middle, right? Unquote. Indeed, scientists are studying mobile addiction feverishly, but there's not one sweeping conclusion I could point to as the cause of the backlash. It's all interesting, though. One study published last year in the Journal of the Association for Consumer Research found that the farther away a student's smartphone was during tests of working memory and fluid intelligence, the better he or she performed, even though the phones were on silent and the students reported not thinking about them at all. Others have found that the conversations held in the absence of smartphones are overall better. Misra et al., 2014. And that taking a photo of a piece of art reduces the likelihood that you'll remember it later. And yet, in 2016, Dutch researchers Helen Vossen and Patty Valkenburg found correlations between heavier social media use and increased empathy in preteens. And a 2012 paper by Chinese researchers Kevin Liu and Alan Wong found that people who multitask with lots of different media might make faster, smarter subconscious decisions about their environment. So, early conclusion, science is not behind the backlash. Interestingly, the Jana Partners letter to Apple did cite two scientific experts, but one is a very loud researcher out of San Diego State University who has been selling books about the impending doom of the next generation since at least 2006, before the iPhone was released. It's important to remember, though, that science sometimes takes a long time to figure out exactly how humans are screwing ourselves up. Our collective feeling of unease about smartphones probably stems from something real. Eventually, the ABCD study that Squeglia is working on could give us some evidence. The kids come in for annual brain scans, interviews, and tests of memory and attention. Quote, we collect DNA to look at genetic influences and saliva samples for hormone analysis, Squeglia says. They're very thorough. The researchers in Squeglia's group are even developing an app using Apple Research Kit and Android Stack that will collect the information about how often the kids use their smartphones so they won't have to trust unreliable self-reports. In the end, we may find out that smartphones are the new comic books, terrifying older generations with their newfangled unseriousness. Or we may learn that smartphones are the sugar of social interactions, undermining our mental health in unprecedented ways. Probably both. For now, technology companies on trial in the court of public opinion are offering preemptive solutions. Most of the stakeholders are responding, says Huffington. According to Mark Zuckerberg's earnings call for the last quarter of 2017, Facebook is showing fewer viral videos to make sure people's time is well spent, reducing time spent on Facebook by roughly 50 million hours every day. Apple has promised to release new, more robust parental controls, a response in part to the open letter. In a call, an Apple representative also pointed out that parents can permanently turn on the Do Not Disturb While Driving function on current iPhones, as well as monitor the usage of different apps by looking at the relative percentage of battery use under Settings. Meanwhile, 40% of Norwegian students are using an app called Hold, which offers rewards for not checking your phone. The company is working with Coca-Cola and Microsoft and is expanding internationally. Finally, Arrow, a company that makes mesh Wi-Fi routers, is beefing up an already available function called Family Profiles that allows parents to set reoccurring internet schedules differently for each kid. It's like pulling the breaker on the internet, says Arrow's CEO and co-founder Nick Weaver. American popular culture has an incredible way of backlashing itself into a mostly stable equilibrium, one in which companies sell more stuff and society doesn't fall apart. For now, it's encouraging to know that the public can still gall manufacturers into serving our best interests, even if we're not quite sure what those are. Because by the time we reach a future that includes automated cars and augmented reality, we may look back fondly on the simpler years of the late 2010s when all we had to contend with were hand computers. And that's the end of the article. Let me see. Does it list who the author is? No, it doesn't. So, anyways, it's an interesting piece. It's fairly balanced, but also quite significantly manipulative. And manipulative because it fails to define its terms. It also fails to give references. For the most part, there are some references, but they talk about various studies, but they don't say what studies they are or where those studies were created. It also has the overtone is a very malevolent universe premise, kind of an overtone to it. The idea that everything is in the universe is scary and unknowable, and that we're always and constantly under threat. And if we're not, then our children are. And if we don't have any real threats, then we have imaginary threats, because that's what this article is basically about. Not about what's happening. They're not presenting any evidence that cell phones are creating damage of any way, shape, or form, sociologically, physiologically, biologically, to us. But what they're presenting is the possibility that it may be happening or about to happen. And so you always make the presumption for the status quo. I use a smartphone. Everybody else I know that uses a smartphone as well. Some people use them more often than others, and there is no evidence, at least no empirical evidence, that anything is happening, anything is going wrong with people. They're not walking around like zombies, walking into trees or whatnot. The only thing you can say that is wrong, that's obviously wrong, is people are getting into more, or getting into more automobile accidents because they're spending too much time distracted by their phones. But that's not a technology problem, that's a personal problem. Which brings me to my next point. A lot of what we expect from the world today and want from the world today is convenience. And we get that from American counterculture, which promises that, which says that life should be convenient. We shouldn't have to make tough choices to decide. For instance, I'm driving, so I'm going to have to decide to put my phone aside, maybe turn it off if it's going to be that much of a distraction while I'm driving, and turn it back on when I get to my destination. That might prove to be rather inconvenient for me, but that's something that I need to do. And American counterculture says no. What we should do then is create an app or a piece of technology like the ones they listed in here, like Hold, where you get points for not checking your phone, which is again manipulative. It's not used to. I was trying to find out if there is any other. There's some other softwares that they mentioned in here, but the Hold is a rather manipulative software, giving people points for not checking their phone, as though they can't do it themselves. They have no self-control. They have no willpower. And again, we get into, so the whole article is demonstrating how, in this debate about the effect of technology on people, how that it's deterministic, that it is technology, and more specifically smartphones, that are forcing people to act in certain ways or behave in certain ways. So therefore, we need some type of counterforce, either generated, something that is created or generated by business, by the capital markets, or something possibly created by the government. Because usually when you get into a situation in which determinism is being flouted, then not far behind is some kind of a government program or a new law coming out to try to force people to do or not do something that the left believes we're being forced to do or not do. So, and then the last thing on this part of what all the studies, I mean, which brings up an interesting point in terms of the issue of reality. The left likes to believe that reality is what the majority says it is, which is not true. It's just a conceit. And so the left spends a lot of time, and you'll see this particularly in news broadcasts, a lot of times doing polls and surveys so that they can try to present that as a reality. Are smartphones good for us or bad for us? Well, let's do a study. Let's get 500 people and study them. Or let's conduct a poll or a survey of 100, 500, or 1,000 people. The problem with the studies and the surveys, beyond the fact that they're subjective, is the fact that they're not even representative samplings. We've got a country of over 350 million people, and yet routinely there are polling companies and survey companies that want to pass off polls and surveys of 1,000 people as being representative of the population at large. It's ridiculous. It would be like the city of Pasadena, which has 200,000 people, and picking one person out of that city and giving them a survey or a poll, and then declaring on the basis of that survey or poll how all Pasadenians think or behave. Absolutely ridiculous. But again, it's a popular technique because it's very um, manipulative, and it has a lot of force, power. It's bullying, and it's intimidating. That's the word I was looking for. It's very intimidating to be presented with, well, if I say, well, there's nothing wrong with cell phones based on my experience, on empirical evidence. And then somebody comes along, well, we did a study that shows differently, or we've conducted a polar survey, and all of these people disagree with you. And it's hard to argue with that. But the way to do it is, again, get into the details. How many people were sampled? How many people were studied? And compare that to the population that they're trying to say it represents. And that's the easy way to defeat it right there. So that's it for this particular article. Tomorrow's Friday, and I'm going to start on it's going to be a 3, maybe 4-part series of chapter 10 of Ayn Rand's Philosophy, Who Needs It? And because it's going to be a rather long chapter. So until then, thank you for joining me, and have a great day.